Hello, and welcome to Lesson 6, which is about IELTS Task 2 discussion questions. So this lesson and the next 3 lessons on opinion essays, problem solution essays, and advantages and disadvantages questions can really be watched in any order. However, I would recommend that before you watch any of these 4 lessons, you watch Lesson 5, which is about direct questions. So that's quite a long and detailed lesson, and the reason for that is that there's a lot of information in there which applies to every single type of question, and which you should be applying to your approach to every single type of question. So therefore, it's a good idea to watch that first, just so you'd be thinking about how to answer the questions in this way when you're watching the following lessons. So discussion questions are one of the most common types of questions on the IELTS exam, and they generally don't cause too much difficulty for people, with a few exceptions of problems that people tend to have. If we first think about what a discussion question is, you're presented with generally 2 opposing viewpoints, so 2 opposite ideas, and you're asked to discuss both of them and then give your opinion about what you think about these ideas, so which one you agree with or which one you don't agree with. And if you think about how you identify a discussion question, that's quite easy. When you see the words discuss both these views and give your own opinion, or something very similar to that, that means it's a discussion question. What's different about a discussion question and an opinion question is the fact that you're discussing views that are views of other people and not necessarily yourself. So if you're given view A and view B and they're opposite, so the government should spend more money on education, or the government should spend more money on something else, or the government shouldn't spend more money on education. So these kind of opposing viewpoints. And so in an opinion question, you're focused entirely on expressing your opinion in relation to whatever viewpoint you're talking about. In a discussion question, you have to discuss both of the views in a kind of neutral way, so that it's clear that there are 2 ways that people think about this particular issue, and then you say what your opinion is in relation to this issue. So the only reason the discussion essays are a little bit complicated is because there are really so many different ways that you can answer them. And if you look in the Cambridge books, the essays prepared by examiners, you'll see lots of different ways of approaching this. But essentially what every one of these has in common, and all good high-scoring answers, is that they do 3 things: discuss view number 1, discuss view number 2, and have a clear opinion about those views. Now, if you do that, however you do that, it's fine. However, there are some things to think about in terms of how you approach this type of question, the structure that you use, and what you do when you answer the question. That, having a plan and kind of doing basically the same thing each time will make the writing process a lot more, it will be faster, smoother, and easier, and most likely you'll have a better chance of really meeting all of the requirements of the question if you come up with an approach and follow that approach. So what we're going to think about is looking at some different discussion questions, and then thinking about structure and how you could approach these aspects of the question, and essentially just answering the question, and then also having a detailed look at an answer to a discussion question. So in terms of structure, your structure needs to make it easy for you to do all of the things that the question is asking you. Now, a lot of teachers will choose a 4-paragraph structure for every single question type, and this is definitely possible. The question is it always the best way to approach a question type? So just following a structure isn't going to give you a good or bad result. It's what you do with your ideas within that structure, which is really important. But there are some things you should consider when you're deciding on how many paragraphs to use or how to structure your essay, because, again, how you do this will determine how quickly and how well you write your essay and how well you meet the requirements of the question as set out in the band descriptors. So I too would normally say that in most cases, a 4-paragraph essay is a good general approach to answering most IELTS questions. The exception is for discussion questions. And the reason why that is not because you cannot write a 4-paragraph discussion essay. You certainly can. And there are some examples in the Cambridge books of these examples prepared by examiners, which use 4 paragraphs. However, these essays tend to be a little bit different than most of the other 4-paragraph essays. And if you look at, the sample answers which are prepared by examiners in the back of the Cambridge books, you'll find ones with 2 body paragraphs, 3 body paragraphs, sometimes even 4 body paragraphs. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just choose one of those: 2 body paragraphs, 3 body paragraphs, 4 body paragraphs. The reason why there are different numbers of body paragraphs is because the person decided to organize the information differently, and that generally would depend on what the question is asking that person to do. And what you will see is that most of the discussion essay examples prepared by examiners tend to be the ones with more than 2 body paragraphs. Again, not all of them, but most of them tend to be. And there's a good reason for that that's related to the structure of what you need to do. So if you think about what you need to do in the essay, you need to present view number 1, view number 2, and your opinion. So that's 3 divisions of information which would very easily fit into 3 body paragraphs. The ones that have 4 body paragraphs, there are a couple of examples, and some of them have what I would call like a modified conclusion. So it doesn't have a traditional, it may have a traditional introduction and 2 body paragraphs, but the conclusion is much longer than normal, and it goes into the person's opinion, which hasn't been mentioned until this point. So essentially the first introduction introduces what the writer is going to talk about. Next body paragraph talks about view number 1, next one about view number 2, and then the opinion is saved for this last body paragraph, which is about the same length as a normal body paragraph, but it also serves as the conclusion. So it's a kind of hybrid conclusion. So if you imagine, you've probably heard, you should never introduce new information in your conclusion. That's true for traditional academic forms of writing. However, IELTS isn't exactly academic writing. It has similarities. You can approach it in an academic way, and if you use a traditional academic conclusion, again, you should not put new information in the conclusion. However, IELTS is really looking for a formal response to a particular viewpoint or an idea or a set of problems, and there's a lot of flexibility to how you do this. So some of the examiners have chosen this way where their conclusion and their opinion is mixed into a kind of longer hybrid paragraph where the opinion is discussed in relation to the 2 views in depth, and that also concludes the essay. And those essays are fine. The reason why I wouldn't recommend that you do that is because it's generally more difficult to do. And so if you think of other ways you could write a discussion essay with 4 paragraphs, sometimes it's common to have like a normal introduction, a normal conclusion, and then discussion of view number 1 with the opinion about view number 1, and discussion of view number 2 with the opinion about view number 2. Now, that's an okay approach. The only problem is that theoretically all of these ways of writing an essay are fine. What you want to find is the one that works for you and the one that's easiest. And so this adding your view to each paragraph tends to produce 2 typical problems. Number 1, the view that's added doesn't really go into much detail, and because of that, it may not be very clear, which is going to be a problem for your score. The other one is that you end up writing so much to make your view or your opinion clear about the view in that particular paragraph that the focus of the paragraph is now, it's debatable whether it's more about your opinion or it's more about the view, or the essay is very long. Again, like if you can do it like this and it works fine, and your essay is, your opinion is clearly and well stated in enough detail to make everything clear, that's okay. But again, those are 2 problems that many students have, and that's the reason why I wouldn't use this structure. If you've had feedback from a qualified professional who understands the band descriptors and everything seems okay, that's fine. Again, do what works for you. But using a 5-paragraph structure, so introduction, conclusion in the traditional way, and then 1 paragraph for the first view, 1 paragraph for the second view, that allows you another paragraph to go into greater detail about your opinion, where there'll still be a very clear central focus of that paragraph. It's also, I think it's easier for people to keep track of the different things they're doing in their minds as they're writing. If you think about what's the purpose of a paragraph, the purpose of the paragraph is to organize information and to have a central topic that explains something. So one topic, 1 paragraph would explain view number 1, 1 view number 2, and then another one for your opinion. This doesn't mean that your essay will be longer. It simply means that you add an appropriate amount of detail for each of the things that you need to do. So some common problems that people have with a discussion essay are not including their opinion or not making their opinion clear. This 5-paragraph structure will help. The other one is talking a lot about one view and just a little bit about the other view. That will get you band 6. So again, if you kind of have an equal discussion of all parts of the question, view 1, view 2, your opinion, you can avoid that problem. Finally, a really serious problem that some people have is writing a discussion essay which sounds like an opinion essay. So that will typically have view number 1, like let's say I agree with view number 2, I disagree with view number 1. And so my first body paragraph is it's all about why I don't agree with it. It doesn't really give it a neutral description of what people think and why other people, think it. It's all about why I think it's wrong. And then view number 2 is all about why I think that one's right, again, without really discussing in a clear and neutral way why people think what they think for that particular view. And again, if you use a 5-paragraph structure, it's a bit easier to separate. These people think this, those people think that, I think this because of blah, 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 blah. So again, keeping everything really clear is really important, because if you write an essay that sounds like an opinion essay, you're not going to get band 6 or higher. You're going to get a low score for task response. So that's really important. Now, there really are an infinite number of ways you can approach doing this type of essay. So you could even include your essay, your opinion pretty thoroughly throughout the whole essay. And if you did it in a certain way, it would be fine. The question is, can most students do that clearly, easily, consistently at the score they need in 40 minutes when they get to the exam? And the answer is, for most people, that's far more difficult than it needs to be. And you'll give yourself a much better chance if you use a structure which makes it easy for you to organize your ideas into an essay which expresses them all clearly and meets all of the requirements of the question. This isn't the only approach that works, but rather just one that seems to fix most of the problems that students that I've encountered have with discussion essays. So let's have a look at a few discussion essays. So you may want to pause your video for a moment, have a look, read the question, and think about, what are the 2 views that you have to talk about, and how do you have to give your opinion? And perhaps if you think that the structure that I mentioned with 5 paragraphs would work for you for these particular questions. All right, so some people say that now we can see films on our phones and tablets, there is no need to go to the cinema. Others say that to be fully enjoyed, films need to be seen in a cinema. Discuss both these views and give your own opinion. So, again, 2 opposing viewpoints. One, we can see films on our phones and we don't need to go to the cinema. The other one, that to see films properly, you need to go to the cinema. So these 2 opposite viewpoints. Now, you could probably come up with an opinion that says, yeah, I think both are fine. You might want to watch a film on your phone in some situations, and you might want to go to the cinema in other situations. That might be your real opinion. The thing is that you want to keep things as simple as possible. So generally, for many of the questions, it won't be possible to agree with both sides. But even if you can, just keep things simple and agree with one side, explain both sides clearly, and then choose one and say why you agree with that side. It will just make your life easier. If we look at this, my first paragraph is going to be, body paragraph is going to be about why people believe that there's no need to go to the cinema and they can just watch films on their phones and tablets. The other one is that you really need to go to the cinema because there's something deficient in watching a film on a small screen like on a phone or a tablet. So again, those are the 2 things. You have to describe why people think each of those, and then you have to talk about which one you agree with and why. Okay, here's the second question. So again, pause your video if you want to have a look. Think about how you would answer this question. And so it's generally believed that the internet is an excellent means of communication, but some people suggest that it may not be the best place to find information. Discuss both these views and give your own opinion. So if you came up with the answer that, there's something a bit strange about this question, then you're right. And if you look at this question, remember what I said, 2 opposing views, generally, not always, but generally speaking, 2 opposing views. So the 2 views here are really on completely different topics. So the one view is the internet is an excellent means of communication. That's one. So internet's good for communicating. The other one, it's not such a reliable place to find information. So those things aren't really related. I mean, they're both about the internet, they're about technology, but they're about 2 very different aspects of technology. It also says it's generally believed the internet is an excellent means of communication. So that means that everyone pretty much agrees about this. So generally when you have a discussion question, what you're doing is discussing ideas that people don't agree about. In this case, you would basically be saying, discuss both views, you'd be talking about, yeah, I too agree that the internet is is an excellent means of communication. And then you would talk about whether or not you believe it's the best place to find information. Again, this is a bit strange, and the reason why, this is most likely a fake question. Now, I've been using this question for years, and I normally will give this question to students to see if they're able to separate the types of information that they need to come up with. So one talking about the internet as a means of communication, and the other one talking about the internet as a place to find information. So when students have this, it's a good exercise to do to see if you can very clearly talk about what you're being asked to without kind of going off topic and talking about just the benefits of the internet or the drawbacks of the internet, or not talking about one of these topics in the correct way. So again, this is a bit of a trick question, but it's a question that can be useful in terms of, like I said, reading the question really carefully and being clear about what you need to do. Now, in this case, if you've read it really clearly and you've got some experience with IELTS, you might have recognized that there's something strange about this question. So the answer for the last one was, it's not a real question and it doesn't really fit. But if you did get a question like that, it would be strange. But if you focus on breaking up the question into its parts and then answering each one, you could do okay. Number 3, again, pause your video if you want to have a look at this. In a number of countries, some people think it is necessary to spend large sums of money on constructing new railway lines for very fast trains between cities. Others believe the money should be spent on improving existing public transport. Discuss both views and give your own opinion. So again, we're back to having kind of opposing ideas. One, public money needs to be spent on constructing railroads. The other view, that money should not be spent on constructing railroads, but rather on improving roads for transport. So again, those are the two things you have to talk about. So one of your body paragraphs would be about why people think it's really important to construct new railway lines for very fast trains between cities. So it could be about helping the environment. It could be about eliminating traffic congestion. It could be about making travel cheaper and more efficient. Whatever idea you choose is fine, but some reason why people would say that railways are more important than improving roads. And then the other view about why it's important to improve roads, what would be the benefits of that over improving railways. So again, those are the two kind of opposing views, and your opinion in another body paragraph would just be a kind of a brief discussion of which view you choose and why. You could easily come up with the idea that both of these things are good, and you could come up with a sort of complex way to describe how governments should deal with this problem of allocating money for both problems. But again, this is just an IELTS essay and you want to keep it simple. So just choose one or the other and give a reasonable, clear, believable opinion about why you think what you think. One more. Okay, so again, pause your video and read through the question, see how you would approach it. And when you're done, unpause and see how you did. So some people think that human history has been a journey from ignorance to knowledge. Others argue that this underestimates the achievements of ancient cultures and overvalues our achievements. Discuss both these views and give your own opinion. So, what do you think? Possibly you think one of the views is talking about, well, I don't even know how to approach this question. This is most definitely a fake question. Now, again, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to get you to realize that there should be some alarm bells going off in your head if you get a question that doesn't fit this model of generally opposing viewpoints that you have to discuss. And there's all sorts of things wrong with this question. So it's very vague. A journey from ignorance to knowledge. What does that mean? Others argue that this underestimates the achievements of ancient cultures. For IELTS questions, any question you get in the IELTS test for writing or speaking, you don't need any specialist knowledge, and this would kind of indicate that you need to discuss ancient cultures, which you might not be able to do. Again, overvalues our achievements. It's very, very vague, and it's asking you to essentially talk about something that the average person might not be able to. Now, again, if you had a degree in anthropology or archaeology, this would be very easy. But the point of IELTS questions is that they don't require specialist knowledge, and so nobody has a particular large advantage over other people when answering the question. So obviously, if you get a question about health and you're a doctor, you'll have a slight advantage over people who don't have a medical degree because you know a lot more about it. But these are general questions. that you need to respond to in a general way. And so having some specialist knowledge, of course, will help you a little bit, but it's not going to make it much easier for you to express your ideas, and it's not going to make it much more difficult for someone else to express your ideas. So again, you wouldn't be asked about technical information about health. This is kind of on the side of it's not a very clear question, and also again it requires knowledge that probably most people don't have. So this is the reason why I've included a couple of strange questions, is because it's really important to practice with real questions. So either questions from the Cambridge books, or from the British Council, or from IDP, IELTS.org, Cambridge. There's nothing magic about writing an accurate, realistic IELTS Task 2 question. Anybody who has experience with the exam can do it. So I could write my own IELTS Task 2 questions that fit the model and wouldn't raise any alarms with other teachers or other examiners, making them think that's a strange sounding question, okay? But without that kind of knowledge about how the questions are constructed, people are just writing questions that kind of have some of the language, like some people think, others believe, to make a kind of question without taking into account all the important factors when looking at a real IELTS question. So if you're practicing with questions like this, really what you're practicing is not what you're going to need to do in the exam, and you're probably going to be really frustrated because, again, what they're asking you to do is difficult and not really clear and not representative of what you'll see in the exam. So be really careful with the questions that you use. So the one view that people think that there are things that individual people can do to prevent climate change, and the other view is that they can't. So individual people can't really prevent climate change or influence climate change. It's large organizations which need to do that. So again, these are kind of opposing viewpoints, and while you could kind of discuss both aspects are important, what individual people do and what governments and businesses do, it's really important when you're outlining the views of other people, these two views, in your body paragraphs, that you don't kind of mix them up. So keeping them separate, this group believes this, the other group believes this. And again, my view is I agree with this one. The first sentence outlines the two views, and the second one explains my opinion, what I'm going to go into greater detail later. So let's look at the first view. So many argue that government and big business can easily take effective steps to stop climate change. Much of the pollution which is responsible for the greenhouse effect, for example, is the result of industrial use of fossil fuels. So if companies changed to renewable sources of energy, these emissions would be reduced. Governments can play a role by passing effective legislation to curb such pollution, or by offering companies financial incentives to switch to cleaner energy sources. So what I've done here essentially is talk about this view. I've talked about both governments and businesses, which is important. So these are different large organizations that would have different roles, and so there's a connection between how government regulates industry, etc. But essentially, I've mentioned both of them, which is what the question is asking me to do. It's not a very long paragraph, but it's a detailed explanation of one side of the question. So the other thing to think is that 250 words, 300 words, maybe a bit more, depending on how quickly you write, is not a lot. And so if you're being asked to give a detailed description of two views and your opinion, you've got to be kind of concise about it, and you can't go into tons and tons of detail. Development is essentially explaining your ideas, why you think what you think, and how it relates to the question. And as long as you do that, you'll be okay. So the question is, have I explained why some people think that governments and industry are able to have a profound effect on climate change? Yes. Let's look at the second one. So if you remember from the introduction, this is the one I said I agree with. On the other hand, others believe that people can take action to halt global climate change. So, if you look at the topic sentence here, it's very clear what I'm going to talk about, the view that people believe that individual people can do something. Whereas if you look at the topic sentence for the one above, many argue that government and big business can easily take effective steps to stop climate change. So that's very clear what I'm going to talk about in that paragraph. So going back to this one, Individual citizens can exert their influence with so many of the choices they make. For instance, people can choose to purchase eco-friendly products, limit their non-essential travel, and use public transport options more often. Since such choices can either contribute to global climate change or its reduction, by making the right choices, individual citizens can take powerful steps to ward off further changes to the global climate. So again, here I'm just talking, the main topic is the actions that people can take, and those specific actions are the choices they make. So if you think about, I've talked about purchase eco-friendly products, limit non-essential travel, and use public transport options more often. I'm not talking about 3 ideas. I'm giving 3 examples of the choices people make in their day-to-day life which can have an impact on climate change. And also I've chosen 3 things that I don't really need to explain. So purchase eco-friendly products. That says it right in what I'm talking about. Eco-friendly products means products which are good for the environment. So that's clear. Limit non-essential travel and use public transport. So everybody understands that travel and use of vehicles and not using public transport has a more negative effect on the climate than using public transport or limiting your travel. Now again, if this were an essay about the benefits of public transport and I wanted to talk about the environment, I would probably go into a lot more detail. But again, I'm using examples that people understand the connection of those examples automatically. This is quite important because, you know, if you think about what you need to do when you develop your ideas, it's basically present your idea and explain how it's connected to what you think or why you think what you think. And again, it's got to be clear and it's got to be detailed enough to make the reason you're using the idea clear or apparent to the person, the examiner, reading your essay. Now, I once read an essay about the benefits and drawbacks of the internet. I can't remember the exact question, but that's essentially what it was about. And the first idea that the person chose was the benefits of the internet. One of the main benefits of the internet is using social media to keep in touch with friends and family. That's enough. Like, that's just one sentence, but it's stating something that is so clear and so obvious to anyone living in the 21st century that you don't need to explain. This means that people can contact each other from anywhere in the world, blah, blah, blah. You could do that, but again, like, it's not really necessary, because when I say one of the benefits is using social media to keep in contact with friends and family, everybody knows what that means. The second paragraph was the disadvantage of the internet is all of the legal and medical information that's available for free on the internet. Now I thought, what on earth is this person talking about? Like, that's not very clear. If the person had only used one sentence to explain that particular point, that would have been a problem. But they went on to explain, in the past, when people needed medical or legal advice, they went to a professional who knew what they were doing and that could give them the correct advice or the correct medical treatment. Now, people go online and diagnose their own illnesses and look for their own legal information without any background that lets them evaluate this information effectively, and this causes problems for people. So now it's very clear why free legal and medical information on the internet could be a drawback. But it's taken a lot more time to explain that, which is fine. You just want to keep in mind the types of examples or the ideas that you use. The level of explanation is going to match the level of explanation required depending on how that idea fits into your essay. So if you look at this again, eco-friendly products, limit non-essential travel, use public transport. It's very clear why anybody reading this in the 21st century knows how those things are connected to climate change. Okay, so the next paragraph is my opinion. So I've kind of neutrally laid out these 2 points of view, and now we come to the point where I talk about my point of view. So the third one. So I've got a whole body paragraph. Again, it's not super long, but it's long enough so I can explain my point of view clearly. So my view is that individual governments and industry are all essential in solving the problems of global climate change. While the influence of larger players is obvious, the collective action of individual citizens should not be discounted, because huge numbers of people working together towards a common goal can accomplish great things. It is therefore important for people to take action at the local level. So I've essentially said, yes, I understand the people who say that large organizations have a much bigger effect, but I don't agree. And I think that there are things that people can do to have a positive effect on the environment, as I've stated in relation to the view in the previous paragraph. So that's enough just to explain my opinion in relation to both of these positions. And then finally, at the conclusion, again, it's just a simple restatement of what I think and why I think it. Leave that in the examiner's ear when they consider giving your essay a score. So in conclusion, while the actions of a single solitary individual may mean little, the collective actions of individual citizens around the world can have a global impact on climate change, rivaling that of government and business. Acknowledging, yes, one person can't do anything, but lots of individual people working together can do something. So essentially, I've just summarized my ideas as they relate to the two positions that I've laid out in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2, and then talked about my opinion in relation to those in body paragraph 3, and this is all kind of wrapped up in a short traditional conclusion. Okay, so if you look at the lesson notes underneath the video on the website, what you'll see is a second version with different things highlighted. So opinion language, language to describe the view of others. This is generally only needed in a discussion essay, and you could use it in other essays, but it's required here. Cohesive devices, referencing devices, and less common vocabulary. So let's just have a look at my opinion. I believe that. There it is. And we should expect, so if you think about where you're going to find my opinion, in the introduction, where else? The body paragraph about my opinion and the conclusion. So my view is that. And then if you think about, in conclusion, while the actions of a single solitary individual may mean little, the collective action of individual citizens. So this is a good point where you can state your opinion without using this type of opinion language sometimes. However, it's much easier to do it with use of this language, especially depending on your level of English. So people who've got a very, very high level of English can make the fact that the statement is representing their opinion clear. And that's all you need to do. Otherwise, it's going to sound like something that's just a statement of fact and not your opinion. So in that case, like, you could easily say, in conclusion, I believe that. Again, the way this sentence is written, it's clear that that's an opinion. But if you're ever in doubt, add that to make sure that it's clear that you're talking about your opinion. Always focus on communicating clearly and doing it at a way that's appropriate for your level of English. So if you can think about a way to do this without a type of cohesive device, that's fine, and that's absolutely good. That can help because you're able to make your ideas clear without a cohesive device, so you have less of a risk of overusing cohesive devices. But if you fail at doing that, then it's not going to be clear that that's your opinion, and that's really important. So again, think about how you use language and how you can use your language and the language that you know well to express your ideas clearly. Okay, so let's look at language to describe the views of others, with one side arguing that. Many argue that. Others believe that. So that makes it very clear that what I'm talking about in that paragraph is what people believe. Not me, necessarily. We'll get to that later. What other people believe. Cohesive devices. So let's see, how many cohesive devices have I used? For example, on the other hand, for instance, since, here since means something like because, while, in conclusion, and while again. So you'll notice that not every single sentence starts with a cohesive device. Cohesive devices are generally used to make clear what's coming next. So examples. In conclusion, here's the end of my essay. I believe that. I think that. Here's my opinion. And then if you look, especially like if you look in the backs of the Cambridge books, what you'll find is not a lot of firstly, secondly, thirdly, therefore, as a result, finally, where it's just too much, and it's not necessary to make what you're saying clear. The only requirement of a cohesive device to use them correctly is to use them when they will make what you say clearer and not use them when they won't, because then it's just excess language getting in the way of your message. So on the other hand, while. So these are words that are used to introduce contrasting information. So again, if you look in the backs of the Cambridge books, what you'll find is very consistent use of cohesive devices like however, on the other hand, on the one hand, while, although. So using these to indicate that I'm going to introduce some different information or some contrasting information just to keep everything clear. So keep that in mind. Referencing devices, on the other hand, are these orange ones. I won't go over all of them. There are quite a few examples in this essay. So a referencing device is just something that you use to refer to something you've talked about before. So it's often using a pronoun to talk about something that a noun that you've mentioned before. So let's look at the third body paragraph. On the other hand, others believe that people can take action to halt global climate change. Individual citizens can exert their influence. So the influence of those individual citizens. So if I said something like individual citizens can exert individual citizens' influence, that's very redundant and strange sounding. Let's see. Next one. For instance, people can choose to purchase eco-friendly products, limit their non-essential travel, and use public transport options more often. Since such choices, which choices? Those choices about eco-friendly products and travel, can either contribute to global climate change or its reduction. So it's global climate changes. So again, if I said can either contribute to global climate change or to the reduction of global climate change. Still clear what I mean? It's a bit clunky. It's a bit redundant. So when you get feedback on your essays, you definitely want to know whether or not you use referencing devices correctly. You can have problems with this, and examiners are trained to look for it, and they do look at your referencing devices. And for band 7 and above, you can't have many problems with referencing devices. It's got to be pretty spot on without any issues. Now, most people do this already without thinking about it, but it is really important to confirm that you don't have problems with this, and you can just continue writing as you write without thinking about referencing devices. Again, if you have a problem, then that's something that you need to address so that when you use referencing devices, you use them correctly and they make your writing clear. And when examiners are looking for that, they don't find any problems. Finally, vocabulary. So less common vocabulary. Some is in blue, some is in purple, and that's because, when you've got one sentence that's got more than one phrase and they're right together, it's to indicate that they are different phrases. So most people think of vocabulary, good vocabulary, as kind of big words or collocations that people might have to look up in the dictionary or something. But it is also kind of set phrases that people use for writing. It is mostly it is the use of very common words in a phrase to describe something, and to do that in one of the ways that an English speaker would do. So let's have a look. There are competing views on whether. So again, that's a kind of set phrase for writing. Have an influence, collocation. An integral part of something, collocation. Take effective steps, collocation. This particular one has a lot of collocations in it. The choices they make. The choices they make. Those aren't particularly impressive words, but that kind of little phrase, the choices that people make. That's a way that an English speaker would say that, and that's why that would be recognized as good vocabulary. Let's see if we can find one more like that. So I won't go over each one, but these are, let's see if we can find huge numbers of people working together towards a common goal. So huge numbers of people working together towards a common goal. Towards a common goal is a collocation, but all those other words aren't particularly impressive words. They're simply normal words that people put together to convey a certain meaning, and that is one of the ways an English speaker would say the exact same thing, this English speaker, in this case. That's the type of thing that examiners notice. Let's see if we can find any individual. Rival. So rivaling that of government. So rival means like competing with or being on the same level or possibly even being better than something, to rival something. So that would be an example of a single word, which is a less common piece of vocabulary. But generally, collocations and groups of common words put together for the task of explaining an idea clearly. Do that and you'll do well. So again, you may be able to imagine this particular essay written as 4-paragraph essay. The reason that I chose 5 paragraphs is because it makes each of the functions that you need to meet very easy to do when you're writing a discussion essay. So there you have it, the most important things you need to consider when writing a discussion essay. And as always, if you remember to keep thinking, regardless of whatever question that you get in your IELTS practice and in the IELTS exam, then you'll do well and shouldn't have any major problems.